Welcome back to our conversation with Dr. Gregory Stanton, the president of Genocide Watch. We're discussing a recent release of genocide warning against the Kurds in the Middle East. Dr. Stanton, so the last question I asked was about the stages in genocide. As you were pointing out, those stages don't have to be, they're not mutually exclusive, or they can happen at the same time.
Right.
But your organization issued a warning.
That's
and
right.
in the past, for example, during the ISIS fight, your organization issued a genocide emergency.
Right.
I would like to know if a genocide warning and a genocide, well, first of all, what's the difference? And also, if they're corresponding to different stages, like if it gets to a certain stage, that's when you issue an emergency, or how do they work?
We have, they don't, a genocide warning is when there are very, very strong signs of the genocide beginning. In other words, where you have already had massacres, for example. We are there very surely for the Kurds. That's what's happened in Afrin, it's what's happened in Caesarea, it's happened across, all the way across in Turkey. So a warning is sort of before it gets to the full-scale mass killing. Right. A genocide emergency is when you're in the full-scale mass killing. The point is, though, that when you get to the stage of a warning, you better declare a genocide alert and get ready and try to stop it. And that's what we're saying right now.
Right. And during the genocide emergency that was issued against ISIS, or during the ISIS fight,
right.
I believe the emergency issuance stated that, and I quote, Kurds are also at risk from Turkey and Hashd al-Shabi militia, respectively, unquote.
Right.
What are some of the similar characteristics between these perpetrators, or would-be perpetrators, or enablers?
Right.
What is it that they have in common, and they're targeting a specific minority group, or
sure. Yeah, in every one of these cases, for Turkey, for instance, or for the Quds forces from Iran, the militias that fight with them, the al-Shabi militias, you have a common enemy, namely people who favor Kurdish autonomy. The Kurds are the common enemy. And you already saw it happen. You know, when Iranian forces, for instance, were in Iraq, when the last ISIS people were being driven out of certain areas of Iraq, the commander of Quds was right there doing that, Mr. Suleiman himself.
Right.
And you have, of course, already had strong action by Turkish troops. The other side, and this is going to be an interesting situation, I believe ISIS is also still active. It hasn't been fully defeated yet. And so, in fact, I believe Turkey has been enabling ISIS. I have thought this for a long time, actually. How was it that so many people got into the ISIS-controlled areas in Syria and Iraq? They went through Turkey. Don't you think Turkey might have stopped that? No, they didn't.
Right.
I think that there is a common enemy there. The ISIS people, realizing that, you know, these Kurds could in fact defeat them, and did defeat them, or are defeating them, realize they're an enemy. And so ISIS is also part of this coalition that is going to try to commit genocide against the Kurds.
So would you say then, in this case, it's mostly the Kurdish desire for autonomy, or for greater cultural rights and independence, let's say, that is kind of pushing some of these forces to react in such a strong way to such demands? I mean, it looks like Hashd al-Shabi, ISIS, and in this case even Turkey, this kind of response to such a demand is beyond what you would expect from forces or groups that are living in 2018.
Well, that's right. I mean, basically, what you've got here are three ancient empires that are continuing to exist and try to reassert their control. You've got the Ottoman Empire,
Right.
namely represented by Turkey. You've got the Persian Empire, represented by Iran, and you've got the Arab Empire, represented by ISIS and some of the people who support ISIS. And all of them consider the Kurds a dangerous threat to their full control. Imperialism always causes genocide, and that is what's happening here. The Kurds have had the misfortune of, being in sort of where all these three empires meet, and
being minoritized.
And being minoritized in all of them. That's right. It's like tectonic plates, continental plates that have run together there, and the unfortunate Kurds are right there where they all touch each other. And what we have here is a case where I think it's important for Kurdish people to realize that genocide is about power. It is about maintaining or expanding power. So the best thing right now for people in Kurdistan and in Rojava and other areas is not to declare independence. It is instead to say, look, we just want to control our own government, we want to control our own affairs, and so forth. In other words, autonomy should be the proper objective here, so that you don't directly threaten these empires, because that's what they are.
Right. I was actually trying to get to that point with my previous question. I mean, in Rojava, for example, in the northern Syrian enclave, the Kurds have said repeatedly that their intention is not an independent Kurdish state, right?
That's right.
Is it really the desire for independence that these forces see as an existential threat to their own existence? Or is it just a mere existence of a different culture and perhaps different language? I don't know, the difference that the Kurds are presenting in the area.
I think it's both, actually. One of the problems with imperialist societies, imperialist empires, is that they do not like difference. They do not like people who are different. And so they will attempt to, for instance, abolish the language of whoever the minority group is. That's why, in Turkey, and for right up until very recently, speaking Kurdish was not allowed, and you couldn't even have Kurdish language schools. There were many, many ways in which Kurds were oppressed. And
which some of those is repeating itself in Africa, as we saw recently. Like They're trying to abolish the Kurdish schools, although there are some reports saying that we will allow it, but at least we've seen some footages where teachers were trying to get the children to learn Arabic, or they were like, we have difficulties to teach them in Arabic nowadays.
No, that's right. In other words, the attempt to extinguish difference is central to genocide. That is one of the main forces that causes genocide to exist. And it's why empires are so almost always do commit genocides. So it is partly simply an existential threat, because some of the people in Turkey believe that, give them autonomy and they will immediately demand independence.
Right.
Well, that's not always the case, and especially if you begin to read some of the writings of Kurdish leaders like Öcalan and others, who do not want independence. They say, wait a minute, that was at one time our objective, but we realize now that the nation state is going to be a thing of the past, that we can live together in a almost confederal arrangement in which we have control over our own society and our own government and our own economy and all that, but we're part of the world after all. Right. And so we want to trade with everybody and we want to have relations with everybody. I think that is a very intelligent way to look at the world. Look at the European Union, how much a difference it's made that they finally got past. Well, you're saying I got past, maybe they're getting past the national differences between, say, France and Germany that caused so many wars.
Right. So it looks like at least some of the hardliners in these other camps, in the Turkish camp and some other camps, they don't really believe that the Kurds are not going for independence, or they're believing this this rejection of nation state is just something temporary. And I also want to add another question. Maybe we can add with end it with this two questions. We're also commemorating Anfal campaign
Yes.
nowadays. An organization like yours, what can we learn from the past atrocities like Anfal to help us detect new ones, or to help
Yes.
us to better respond to new ones? Because obviously in the Anfal campaign we still are struggling to get Western countries or other nations to recognize it.
Yes. In fact, I think remembering and commemorating these past genocides is very important to understand the warning signs and to look out for genocides that are coming. And that is exactly what's coming right now. Well, after all, in the Anfal, there was the chemical attack on Halabja. Well, guess what happened just last week? A huge chemical attack in Syria. As they say in French, the more things change, the more they stay the same. It looks like nobody has learned. And I think one of the things we have to learn from this, a really good example of what happens if you do have a power like the United States willing to defend the autonomy of Kurdish people. Kurdistan became, I think, one of the model areas of the whole Middle East with American protection by having our Air Force say, look, we aren't going to allow the Iraqi Air Force in here or anybody else. I believe we need to do the same thing right now with Rojava, with northern Iraq, and basically tell the Turks we aren't going to put up with this anymore, and we basically have to tell the Russians the same thing. It's going to be very, very hard to do, but I think that is a lesson that we should learn.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stanton. It was a very informative conversation, and thank you for watching.